3 years have been erased from your life, but you don't remember a single second of that time. You have no idea where you've been, what happened to you, or why you even survived to return. This isn't just a story about a disappearance. This is a story about a return that raises more questions than the disappearance itself. 3 friends entered Spearfish Canyon in South Dakota on a summer afternoon. 3 years later, one of them appeared on the road, barefoot, emaciated, with eyes blank as if they had never seen sunlight. What happened to him? And where did the other 2 go? What lies beneath the ground in the Black Hills, where a man who called himself the Surveyor once lived and watched them? The most terrifying part of this story is the silence. The silence of the mountains and forests, and the silence of the sole survivor. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the afternoon of August 14, 2020, Spearfish Canyon in the Black Hills of South Dakota carried the peaceful feel of a late summer day. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the tall pine canopies, casting a pale glow over the waters of Iron Creek, as the silver SUV belonging to 3 friends, Evan Reed, Grace Miller, and Noah Lang, turned into the gravel parking lot near the Iron Creek trailhead. This is one of the most famous areas in Spearfish Canyon, where sandstone cliffs intermixed with juniper forests create winding paths that attract visitors from across the Midwest. That day, the area was sparsely visited, with only a few tourist vehicles scattered around before sunset. According to GPS data recovered later, the group's journey began at 3:27 p.m. from Rapid City and arrived at Spearfish Canyon around 5:10 p.m. They stopped at Roughlock Falls, recorded a short video, and sent a few group photos to friends. Photos showing them smiling, standing together against the backdrop of the white rushing waterfall. A couple from Minnesota were the last people to see them as the 3 left the viewpoint to head deeper into the forest. The husband recalled hearing Grace say something about light reflecting off the northern cliff face before they gradually disappeared from view. Around 6:40 p.m., a traffic camera captured the group's SUV, still parked in its original spot, indicating they had decided to hike a longer route rather than drive to another campground. At 7:15 p.m., the sky turned gray, the temperature dropped sharply, and light rain began to fall. The Spearfish weather report noted a short but heavy shower at 8:10 p.m. After that point, all signals from the 3 phones went dead. At 9:02 p.m., Grace's phone sent its final GPS signal from the area where Elk Creek and Iron Creek intersect. From then on, their entire digital connection vanished completely. The next morning, the families of Evan and Grace began calling repeatedly, but all calls went straight to voicemail. Messages remained unread, shared location updates stopped. By evening, as the weather worsened and no one from the group made contact, their initial worry quickly turned to panic. Evan's father, along with 2 friends, drove to Spearfish Canyon, searched around the parking lot, but found only the SUV locked tight, with a few water bottles and an unfolded map left inside. At 9:40 p.m., on August 15, 2020, Linda Miller, Grace's mother, called the Pennington County Sheriff's Office to officially report the disappearance. Early the next morning, the search operation was launched. Sheriff Tom Heller arrived at Spearfish Canyon while it was still foggy, directing the mobilization of all local search and rescue forces. 6 SR teams, each with 4 to 6 members, were divided into different directions, covering a 5-square-kilometer area around the Iron Creek trailhead, where the group's SUV was found intact and locked. A field command post was set up right in the parking lot, including an operations tent, satellite communication station, topographic maps, GPS devices, and drones. When technicians inspected the SUV, they noted no signs of tampering, doors locked, windows intact, with 3 sleeping bags, a box of dry food, and 2 partially unfolded maps still inside. The only footprints around the vehicle belonged to a morning patrol ranger, ruled out from the scene. The second team deployed along Iron Creek and Elk Creek, 2 parallel streams running through dense forest. Around 10 a.m., a faint shoe print was discovered in a muddy bank area, more than a kilometer northeast of the parking lot. The print was not clear enough to determine size or type, but it was photographed and marked as evidence. Shortly after, light rain began, causing the mud to soften and the trace to quickly disappear. Other search teams moved north, expanding to the edge of rough rock cliffs, using thermal detectors and infrared cameras to scan the canopy. From above, the technical team's drones circled for 2 hours, but the data showed no human heat signatures. At the command post, the topographic map was marked with overlapping search lines, areas shaded to avoid overlaps. By noon, the weather worsened. Thick fog, intermittent radio signal disruptions between teams. One unit was sent to check nearby trails and the nearest ranger station. No visitors or patrol staff reported seeing the 3 missing people after August 14th. Police also reviewed phone data, all signals lost at the same time, 9:02 p.m. that evening. By afternoon, the 4th team searched downstream Elk Creek, finding no belongings, camping signs, or any fabric scraps, cans, or dropped items. Efforts continued into the evening, teams returning to the field base at 6:30 p.m. to compile results. The report noted, no signs of life, no physical evidence, no indications of foul play, no evidence of accident. Sheriff Heller ordered continued nighttime searches with thermal cameras, adding another SAR team from Hill City the next morning. As darkness fell, fog enveloped Spearfish Canyon, headlamp beams swept over tree trunks and rocks, then faded into the cold, damp forest. The first night of the operation ended with no sign that the 3 young friends were still there. On the morning of August 17, 2020, with no signals recorded in the initial area around Iron Creek, Sheriff Tom Heller ordered the search expanded south toward the edge of Pactola Reservoir, where the terrain is steep, with many cliffs and small ravines draining into the lake. 2 new SR teams were added, along with a South Dakota Highway Patrol helicopter unit for aerial sweeps. In addition to official forces, nearly 30 volunteers from Hill City and Rapid City arrived, divided into small groups advancing along side trails and old overgrown vehicle paths. The field command at Iron Creek was expanded with logistics tents and supply areas, new topographic maps printed and marked with different colors for searched zones. The helicopter began operations at 8:15 a.m., flying in arcs from Spearfish Canyon southeast, lowering altitude over the Pactola area. From above, the pilot noted rock slides at several steep points, but no unusual objects or reflective glints that could belong to camping gear. On the ground, the second search team moved along an old trail leading to a restricted zone, an area once sealed due to subsidence risks. There they discovered tire tracks impressed in wet clay soil about 6 kilometers southeast of the parking lot. The tread pattern was completely different from the missing group's SUV tires. Forensics photographed and measured them, but due to sinking soil and prior night's rain, the exact timing could not be determined. Police suspected another vehicle had entered and exited the area while the 3 friends were in Spearfish Canyon. Technicians reviewed data from traffic cameras along Highway 14A to cross-reference vehicles appearing between August 14 and 15, but the recording system at the segment near the Pactola entrance lost power all night on the 14th, resulting in no stored data. This was noted in the technical report as an unusual power interruption. Meanwhile, SAR teams scanned open clearings near the lake shore, common summer camping spots, but found no signs of camps, fires, or related items. They also discovered no bottles, clothing, or any human debris within a 2-kilometer radius. Thermal detectors and motion sensors placed in the forest that day recorded no unusual movement. By noon, strong winds and sudden thunderstorms forced the helicopter back to base and ground teams to pause. Temperatures dropped to just 10 degrees Celsius, visibility severely limited by heavy rain and fog covering the entire canyon. Command maintained constant radio contact with scattered teams to prevent anyone getting lost, though signals were frequently jammed. By 5 p.m., all forces were ordered back to the field, command to await better weather. The end-of-day report stated clearly, search expanded to Pactola Reservoir edge, deployed helicopter and 3 drones. No results, no physical evidence found, No unusual objects or activity in surveyed area. Heavy rain severely hampered operations. As night fell, forest roads became slippery, command post lights reflecting through the rain like solitary streaks in the dark woods. The third day of searching ended in silence, with no sign that the three friends had ever left the Iron Creek area. By August 24, 2020, the search operation at Spearfish Canyon entered its 10th day with no results whatsoever. SAR teams had swept the entire area from Iron Creek Trailhead down to Pactola Lake Shore, using helicopters, infrared drones, thermal detectors, and tracking dogs, but found no traces related to the three missing people. Rugged terrain and prolonged heavy rain caused many trail sections to collapse, fallen trees blocking paths, forcing rescue forces to gradually narrow operations. All they recorded were a few faded shoe prints washed away by water, an old tire track, and some broken branches of unclear cause. Police department analysts re-examined all phone data, credit cards, and personal GPS records of the three. Activity ceased at the exact same time, 9:02 p.m. on August 14th. No social media access, no financial activity, no new location signals from their devices. In the following days, as weather continued to deteriorate, the operation was forced to scale down. A meeting was held at the field command on the morning of August 25th, attended by Sheriff Tom Heller, a National Forest Service representative, and SR commanders. The consensus was recorded: no evidence of criminal act or human-caused accident. High probability the three individuals became disoriented and encountered issues due to weather or terrain. Status: probable exposure, lost hikers. That afternoon, an official press release announced suspension of the large-scale search, maintaining only periodic patrols. The victims' families strongly opposed the decision. They argued the simultaneous signal loss and strange tire tracks were unusual signs warranting further investigation. On August 26, David Reed, Evan's father, filed a petition requesting Federal Bureau of Investigation assistance, citing possible kidnapping or federal crime in federal forest area. However, the response from the FBI's Sioux Falls Regional Office 2 days later stated, no criminal elements identified in current report. No evidence of crime, abduction, or use of force. Case considered natural disappearance under South Dakota state jurisdiction. The official file was closed at the end of August 2020 and archived under missing persons, non-criminal event. At Spearfish Canyon, temporary equipment was dismantled, field tents removed, leaving only faint paint marks on topographic maps, remnants of fruitless search days. In local media, the case quickly faded after a few short reports. The victims' families clung on a few more days in the area, walking remaining trails, calling their children's names into the forest, but received nothing but echoes in return. On the night of August 30th, as autumn rain began pouring over the Black Hills, the final rescue team withdrew from the scene. The temporary command post closed. The file was transferred to the sheriff's office for long-term storage, officially ending the initial search phase. 10 intense days, 10 days full of effort and disappointment, concluding without a single trace, proving the three friends had ever left that forest. 2 years after the search operation in Spearfish Canyon concluded, the case files for the disappearances of Evan Reed, Grace Miller, and Noah Lang remain dormant in the archives of the Pennington County Sheriff's Office, with no further updates. All additional investigative efforts were halted due to lack of evidence, and the case gradually became one of the longest unresolved missing persons incidents in the history of the Black Hills region. The families of the three victims refused to accept the probable exposure conclusion in the final report. They continued to organize independent searches every year, mobilizing friends, volunteers, and local hikers. Each summer, they set up tents near the Iron Creek Trailhead, distributed flyers, and hung banners along Highway 14A in the hope that someone had seen something on that rainy night 2 years earlier. These small-scale efforts yielded only a few old scraps of fabric, rusted cans, and unidentified campfire remnants. none of which could be directly linked to the three missing individuals. While authorities remained silent, online forums began circulating various theories. Some believed the group had wandered off into the western forest area with abandoned mines. Others suggested they were swept away by flash floods after the rain, their bodies carried into Pactola Reservoir, and never recovered. On Reddit and local Facebook groups, the case became a year-round topic of debate in 2021, attracting thousands of comments, with many users even posting maps, satellite images, and simulations of the group's final route. This attention led to an independent team of journalists in Denver producing a podcast titled Vanished Trails, focused on investigating disappearances in the northern U.S. mountains. In an episode released in early 2022, they mentioned an abandoned site called Castle Peak, a former U.S. Department of Defense technical facility located about 25 miles south of Spearfish Canyon. According to information they gathered from declassified documents, Castle Peak had been a site for testing geological sensor systems, closed in 1998. After a ground subsidence incident. Since then, the area had been classified as restricted and little known. The podcast episode sparked significant reactions, with some suggesting the three victims may have accidentally wandered into that zone. However, local authorities neither confirmed nor reopened the case files. Local media only briefly noted that any new investigative efforts require physical evidence. That same year, Grace's family submitted a second petition to the FBI, requesting a re-examination of GPS signal data and satellite imagery from the night of August 14, 2020. But the response was identical to the one 2 years prior. No criminal elements identified. By July 2022, the official case file was transferred to inactive, pending cold case classification status, meaning it would only be reviewed if new evidence or witnesses emerged. In internal documents, the Spearfish case was categorized as an unresolved wilderness disappearance, alongside dozens of others in northern Wyoming and South Dakota. Residents around Spearfish Canyon had grown accustomed to seeing the small memorial sign beside the Iron Creek Trail, engraved with the three names and the words, "Lost, but not forgotten." For many, the case had long been closed. But for the victims' families, time only amplified the question, how could three people vanish completely in a forest that wasn't overly vast, where even falling leaves couldn't escape the eyes of searchers? At the end of 2022, when the sheriff's office completed the process of moving the files to cold storage, the Spearfish Canyon case was officially designated a cold case, no assigned investigator, no budget, and no promised answers. On the morning of September 7, 2023, more than 3 years after the Spearfish Canyon disappearance was archived as a cold case, a gas station employee in the town of Deadwood, about 40 miles west of the original site, reported to police that a strange man had appeared in a state of extreme exhaustion, barefoot, clothes torn and filthy, face gaunt, and skin darkened, as if from prolonged exposure to the elements, like a long-term drifter. When asked his name, he whispered softly, almost inaudibly, "I'm Evan Reed." The on-duty employee initially thought he was a homeless person, but when the man collapsed beside the water pump, repeating his name 3 more times, the employee called 911. Emergency services arrived on scene 8 minutes later and transported the victim to the ER at Monument Health Rapid City Hospital. The initial medical report noted severe physical depletion, weight loss exceeding 25% compared to 2020 records, pale skin with depigmentation due to lack of sunlight, significant muscle atrophy. Doctors discovered multiple long scars around the wrists, ankles, and behind the knees, all old and healed, along with numerous small calluses on the hands. Blood tests showed severe vitamin D and potassium deficiencies, consistent with prolonged confinement or isolation. Upon regaining consciousness after several hours of IV fluids, the man was asked his name and correctly provided his date of birth, social security number, and hometown of Rapid City, matching exactly the records for Evan Reed, declared missing in August 2020. Biometric identification via fingerprints and facial recognition confirmed a 99.8% match. Deadwood police immediately contacted the Pennington County Sheriff's Office and sent an urgent alert to the FBI field office in Sioux Falls. In the intake report, medical staff noted that Evan was slow to respond, often losing focus, and unaware of the current time and location. When asked where he had been for the past 3 years, he replied vaguely, "Underground, a place with no light." When the doctor pressed further, he repeated the phrases "a bunker," with metal sounds and voices before entering a state of panic, with rapid heartbeat, requiring sedation. Afterward, a psychiatrist was brought in for the preliminary evaluation and determined that Evan exhibited signs of acute post-traumatic stress disorder. He could not clearly recall details about the place he had been or who had held him, only remembering the sensation of always being watched and sounds echoing in the darkness. Police seized all items on his person: an old worn jacket, a nylon bag containing a few small rocks, and a crumpled piece of foil with no identifying information. Clothing and samples were sealed and sent to the lab. Meanwhile, news of one of the 3 missing from Spearfish Canyon returning spread rapidly, drawing local media to gather outside the hospital. To prevent disruption, Rapid City Police coordinated security, limiting media access to the patient. That afternoon, a federal task force arrived, reconfirmed identity, and collected DNA samples for comparison. The second results matched perfectly with Evan Reed's profile in the National CODIS database. In internal records, the event was noted as reappearance under abnormal conditions. Investigators immediately reopened the frozen Spearfish Canyon file from 2020 for review. During the first 48 hours after discovery, Evan was under constant monitoring, with neurological checks and intermittent interviews. He could only manage short, fragmented sentences, mostly describing sounds and disjointed images. Blue light, metallic damp smell, dripping water, scratching on walls, and a man standing behind glass. When shown a map of the Black Hills area, Evan reacted strongly to the marked region south of Spearfish, near Castle Peak. He trembled, avoided looking, and whispered, "I was there, or somewhere near there." Noting this connection, police immediately reported to the FBI for assessment. By the evening of September 8th, the hospital confirmed Evan's condition had stabilized, though cognitive recovery was incomplete. His family was allowed a short visit, which took place in silence, with only a few questions asked, but none answered. Doctors stated that physical recovery would take months, while psychological recovery could take longer. The hospital's summary report to investigators concluded, patient's condition reflects a prolonged period of isolation, malnutrition, lack of light, and possible physical restraint. These descriptions marked the most significant shift in the Spearfish Canyon case since the file was closed 3 years earlier. One of the 3 missing persons had returned alive, but bringing more questions than answers. Immediately after the identification results and Monument Health medical reports were confirmed, the FBI officially took over the case. On September 9, 2023, the Sioux Falls field office formed a special federal investigative team, coordinating between the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the South Dakota Department of Justice. The appointed team leader was Special Agent Mark Coulter, a veteran investigator who had handled long-term missing persons cases in Montana, assisted by Detective Susan Halberg of the South Dakota Division of Criminal Investigation. The initial objective was to verify the circumstances of Evan Reed's reappearance, while assessing potential criminal elements in the Spearfish Canyon case closed 3 years prior. The first formal statement session took place in the second-floor recovery room of the hospital, witnessed by 2 psychiatrists and the family's legal representative. Evan was still weak, with a hoarse voice and interrupted breathing, but more alert than 2 days earlier. When asked about the period he was missing, Evan described only fragmented images, dim blue light, metallic smell, and noise like gears turning. He said he sometimes heard a man's voice, low and steady, like reading something, but never saw the face. When asked to describe the surroundings, Evan said he couldn't see a door, just cold walls and a low ceiling. Most of the time, he was bound or confined in a narrow chamber, unable to distinguish day from night. While Coulter took notes, Hallberg observed Evan repeatedly touching his left palm, where there was a distorted circular scar about 7 millimeters long, resembling an engraving made by a sharp metal object. When asked about the scar's origin, Evan appeared confused, saying he woke up and it was already there, and thought that man did it. Coulter requested close-up photos of the scar, which were sent to the FBI Digital Forensics Lab for analysis. The surprising result: the markings on the skin formed a sequence of 6 digits, interspersed with periods, formatted like GPS coordinates. When entered into the federal mapping system, the location pointed to a mountainous area south of Spearfish, about 40 miles from the disappearance site, coinciding with the Castle Peak Zone, a former military technical facility sealed since 1998, due to subsidence and heavy metal contamination. When Susan Hallberg read the results aloud in the hospital conference room, the team temporarily halted all interviews, shifting to evidence classification procedures. To preserve legal integrity, Coulter documented the scar bearing direct geographic reference value to a federal restricted area. That same day, the Sioux Falls FBI office submitted a support request to the Department of Defense to verify ownership status of the Castle Peak land and whether it remained under military control or had been transferred to the state. The initial response indicated the area was now managed by the Department of the Interior, but retained federal restricted zone classification, prohibiting access without special authorization. While awaiting official response, the team gathered additional data from other sources. They reviewed Evan Reed's cell signal records over the 3 years, finding the device abruptly went offline on the day of disappearance and was never reactivated, ruling out free movement or wilderness survival. Commercial satellite data from subsequent days was cross-referenced, but imagery of the Spearfish and Castle Peak areas was obscured by thick clouds and rain, yielding no specific results. Nevertheless, the coincidence between the coordinates on Evan's hand and Castle Peak's location led the team to treat it as the most credible lead since the case began. On September 11th, Coulter submitted a petition for a federal search warrant for the Castle Peak area, routed through the U.S. Attorney's Office for South Dakota. In the application, he stated, "Reasonable grounds exist to believe victim Evan Reed was unlawfully detained at coordinates redacted, currently within the Castle Peak Zone, a restricted access site potentially containing evidence or additional victims." He also requested logistical support from the National Forest Service technical team for safety in the geologically unstable area. While awaiting court approval, Coulter and Hallberg returned to the hospital for supplemental statements. Evan remained fatigued, but when shown satellite images of Castle Peak, he reacted visibly, elevated pulse, panicked eyes, repeatedly saying, "Don't let them hear." This response was noted by the psychiatrist as trauma-triggered memory activation. After the session, Coulter concluded in the record that the likelihood of Evan being held in an underground facility at Castle Peak was very high. On September 13th, the search warrant was approved. The FBI prepared to deploy technical and forensic teams into the restricted zone to verify what lay beneath the surface of Castle Peak, a place where 3 years earlier, no one imagined anything remained to be found. On September 15, 2023, 2 days after the search warrant was approved, the federal forensic team along with DCI investigators arrived at Castle Peak, a mountainous area that had been sealed off for more than 2 decades. The area is located deep in the Black Hills Range, surrounded by dense pine forests, with access roads blocked by rusted metal barricades and signs reading Federal Restricted Zone. After several hours of terrain surveying, the technical team identified an unusual depression on the eastern slope, a spot that old Department of Defense maps had once marked as a secondary ventilation shaft for a geological research facility. Beneath the moss-covered soil and overgrown vegetation, magnetic scanners detected a large metal object at a depth of nearly 2 meters. Excavation work began at 8 a.m. on September 16th, under dry and cold weather conditions, The forensic team drilled through layers of earth and rock, revealing a steel hatch approximately 1.5 meters in diameter and 4 centimeters thick, with weld marks on the surface that appeared newer than the surrounding metal. After cutting it open, a heavy odor of metal and mold rose up. Below was a small cylindrical shaft, about 5 meters deep, completely dark inside. An infrared camera was lowered first, recording steel walls, a concrete floor, and an object lying on its side near one corner. When the forensic team descended for inspection, they discovered the body of a female in a fetal position, her torso wrapped in an old blanket, with rusted chain segments still attached to her wrists and ankles. The victim's clothing had largely disintegrated, leaving only a few scraps of fabric adhering to the skin. At the scene were also a broken handheld camcorder with a shattered screen and leaking battery, along with a small plastic-covered notebook bearing the printed title, Field Study 19B. All evidence was sealed, cataloged, and transferred to the Mobile Field Analysis Unit. During the initial examination, the forensic team noted that the body had been naturally preserved due to low humidity and sealed air, sufficient for dental identification. Grace Miller's dental records, one of the 3 individuals missing since 2020, were compared that same day and showed a complete match. Preliminary conclusion: the body belonged to Grace Miller, who disappeared along with Evan Reed and Noah Lang. The initial forensic report indicated that the victim died between 9 and 11 months after the disappearance, meaning she had survived at least 6 months after the case was closed. There were no signs of animal activity or external environmental damage, indicating she had been held in a sealed environment for an extended period before death. Muscle tissue samples revealed severe vitamin and mineral deficiencies, along with signs of prolonged dehydration. Old scratches and bruises around the wrists matched the locations of the chain segments found in the shaft. Next to the body, a damaged camcorder was recovered. Its storage tape was carefully preserved in a moisture-proof container for transfer to analysis. The Field Study 19B notebook was dusty on the outside, but legible, containing simple geological diagrams, measurement symbols, and short notes in black ballpoint pen. Mostly numbers, units of measurement, and isolated letters, such as P1, C12, or SLL3. On the last page was a different handwriting. End of test phase 11. Need to recreate sample. Forensic experts determined the handwriting did not match Grace Miller's, based on her personal signature records, suggesting the notebook likely belonged to someone else. While the investigation team prepared reports, the shaft area was fully sealed off, with no media access permitted. An internal FBI bulletin noted that the entire Castle Peak shaft complex might be remnants of an abandoned military engineering research facility, consisting of multiple pipe sections and small chambers connected by underground passages. The discovery of the body in this location immediately reclassified the Spearfish Canyon case from natural disappearance to federal criminal investigation. On September 17, forensic teams continued excavating the remaining 3 meters of the shaft, recovering numerous fragments of electronic equipment, charred wiring, a damaged industrial lamp, and 2 bent iron pipes, all logged as additional evidence. The end-of-day report from the lead forensic examiner to Washington stated, "The scene shows signs of unlawful detention in a man-made structure. The victim died in isolation, with preliminary cause of death being physical exhaustion due to prolonged malnutrition and dehydration." Sheriff Tom Heller, who had led the 2020 search operation, was present at the scene that afternoon and signed off on transferring the case files to the FBI. This event marked a turning point in the entire case. The first time in 3 years that authorities had concrete evidence showing the Spearfish Canyon disappearance was not an accident, but a carefully organized and concealed criminal act. The Federal Forensic Laboratory at Quantico received all samples collected from Castle Peak on September 19, 2023. DNA analysis began immediately after Grace Miller's tissue samples were confirmed. Experts started extracting biological traces from the chains, blanket, and steel wall surfaces inside the shaft. Initial results showed, in addition to Grace's DNA, an unknown male sample that did not match any national database or belong to Evan Reed or Noah Lang. This sample appeared on both the inner links of the chains and the camcorder handle, indicating direct contact with the victim and evidence. On the dust inside the shaft, the forensic chemistry team detected components characteristic of ammonium nitrate, a substance commonly used in geological experiments and industrial explosives, rarely occurring naturally in the Spearfish Canyon environment. Spectroscopic analysis of the metal fragments revealed they were high-strength alloys of technical origin, consistent with materials used in underground military facilities from the late 1990s. Under an electron microscope, fine dust particles showed uniform structure, proving they resulted from mechanical grinding or metalworking rather than natural oxidation. When compared to archived defense material data, the investigation team found a 97% match with alloys used in the military project, codenamed Surveyor 19B, a U.S. Department of Defense program, to develop an underground sensor network, with a test facility at Castle Peak from 1994 until its closure in 1998. Due to a subsurface collapse, declassified documents revealed Surveyor 19B aimed to establish underground geological sensors to measure seismic activity and mineral flows using pulse energy. Participating engineers were bound by confidentiality clauses, with most reassigned or retired after the project ended. On the final personnel list, the name of geological engineer Raymond Kroll, born 1976, stood out as the on-site technical supervisor and noted as the designer of underground test structure number 4. After the project closed, Kroll left the military and worked for a mineral surveying company in Wyoming for 4 years before being fired in 2018 for erratic behavior and workplace conduct disorders. DCI, coordinating with the FBI, retrieved Kroll's civilian records. His state geological engineering license had expired, he had no fixed address, and his bank accounts had been inactive since 2019. Medical records noted short-term psychological treatment at a private clinic in Casper for paranoid control of space and obsessive symmetry in structures. When the federal team reviewed residency and tax records, they discovered Kroll still maintained an old technical passport, allowing access to certain abandoned underground survey sites, including Castle Peak. His last recorded entry in government personnel databases was in February 2019, with no further information. While DNA samples continued to be cross-referenced, the Castle Peak field analysis team shifted to examining the Field Study 19B notebook recovered next to Grace Miller's body. After cleaning and digitizing, experts found that the handwriting on most pages matched Raymond Kroll's signature samples from Department of Defense personnel files. The line end of test phase 11, need to recreate sample, was confirmed as his through comparison of 14 handwriting characteristics. This strengthened the hypothesis that Kroll had returned to the old facility and repurposed part of the abandoned shaft for personal use. DCI investigators checked regional geological map databases and found Kroll had submitted 2 survey applications for the Spearfish area in 2017 and 2018, both denied due to restricted zone status. In the applications, he described the objective as reassessing shaft structural stability and potential recovery of underground sensors. This detail led investigators to believe he had returned to Castle Peak after denial, possibly entering secretly to continue personal activities. FBI technical specialists simultaneously analyzed data from the damaged camcorder, extracting several heavily distorted short video clips, but recognizable elements included a narrow space with dim blue light, steel background, a fleeting human figure, and metallic noises similar to those described by Evan Reed. In one frame, the characters 19B were clearly visible on the wall behind, matching the military project code. Combining DNA results, handwriting, and technical materials, Coulter and Halberg agreed that Castle Peak was not only the site where Grace Miller was held, but had also been used by an individual with advanced technical expertise, very likely connected to Project Surveyor 19B. On September 22, 2023, the FBI officially added Raymond Krell to the persons of interest list, opening a background investigation and retrieving all professional licenses, residency history, assets, and personal contacts. The Spearfish Canyon case status was upgraded from federal review to active federal criminal investigation, marking the shift in focus from the crime scene to pursuing the individual directly linked to the technical evidence and unidentified male DNA. After 2 weeks of treatment and supervised psychological therapy sessions, Evan Reed began recalling his missing period more clearly. Information sessions were conducted alternately between a psychiatrist and investigators Coulter and Halberg, lasting many hours each day in a secure hospital room at Monument Health. In the first session, Evan recounted that on the evening of August 14, 2020, as the group left Roughlock Falls to return to the parking area, heavy rain suddenly poured down. They veered off the main trail to avoid flash flooding from the hillside, and that was when he heard an engine noise somewhere below. A white light swept across, followed by a small explosion behind him. Evan said he lost consciousness immediately after feeling a heavy blow to the head. When he awoke, he was in a narrow metal space with a low ceiling. No windows, lit only by a faint blue bulb overhead. His entire body was bound with thin steel wire, his hands burning from torn skin. Metallic footsteps echoed regularly. Then a man's voice came over a speaker. "Begin the test." He was untied and given a device resembling a laser distance meter, forced to aim it at the shaft walls and read measurements aloud. He did not understand the purpose, but the man constantly monitored via a wall-mounted camera and took notes. Evan remembered little of the captor's appearance, just a tall silhouette in a long coat, gray gloves, and a mask covering half the face. When Evan asked who he was, the reply was, "I am the Surveyor." According to Evan, Grace and Noah were held in separate cells connected by a narrow passage to the central area. Occasionally, they were allowed brief meetings while carrying measurement devices or water. The three tried to track time by counting light cycles, but the lighting schedule was irregular. Evan estimated he was held for at least several months, based on his hair and beard length reflected in metal surfaces. Grace gradually weakened, often coughing and fainting while working in the shaft. One day, when the lights turned red, she tried to run toward the narrow passage leading to the iron door they had been brought through. But an alarm sounded. Evan heard screams followed by repeated metallic impacts. After that, she never returned. The surveyor announced over the speaker that the test subject failed standards and forced Evan to continue alone. A few weeks later, Noah was separated from the main shaft area. Evan did not know where he was taken, only hearing engine noise and prolonged metallic scraping, as if something was being moved by a winch. From then on, only Evan remained in the sealed space, repeating measurements, sometimes left without food for days. He recalled fainting once. When he awoke, the blue light was off, and the character 19B appeared in red paint on the wall. This convinced him they were held in part of the old military shaft at Castle Peak that the FBI was investigating. Evan said, the surveyor rarely spoke directly, mostly controlling via speaker with an echoing, emotionless voice. He often spoke of deviation levels and balancing sample numbers. Evan was fed a pasty mixture in metal containers and water with a strong chlorine smell. He never saw the sky during captivity, only hearing wind and occasional drips from overhead steel pipes. Finally, one night when the lights did not return after hours of darkness, he heard a small explosion and smelled acrid smoke. Evan groped toward a cold airflow, finding a narrow escape behind a loosened metal panel. He crawled through a long muddy pipe, eventually emerging on the surface near a rocky ravine. He did not know how much time had passed, only remembering the sun was blinding. After several days of aimless walking, he reached the town of Deadwood, where he was found. When the FBI compared his statement to Castle Peak scene data, every detail matched: steel shaft structure, ventilation pipes, wall paint colors, and 19B markings in the same locations as in the recovered notebook. Restraint marks on his wrists and ankles matched the chain type found with Grace Miller's body. The map he sketched accurately depicted the main corridor slope, matching forensic measurements. The September 30, 2023 investigation report stated, "Witness Evan Reed's statement is consistent with the Castle Peak scene, confirming prolonged forced detention with at least one victim deceased. The subject, self-identifying as the Surveyor, possesses advanced technical knowledge, highly likely having participated in or had access to military survey project Surveyor, 19B. With this testimony, the Spearfish Canyon case officially shifted focus from disappearance incident to organized kidnapping and detention crime. After Evan Reed's testimony was verified as matching Castle Peak shaft details, the federal investigation team fully focused on the name Raymond Krall, the geological engineer formerly involved in Project Surveyor 19B. On October 2, 2023, the FBI coordinated with the Wyoming State Criminal Investigation Office to trace Krall in areas linked to his past professional activity. Administrative records showed Krall was born in 1976 in Billings, Montana, held a master's degree in engineering geology, and served in a military survey program until 1998. After the Castle Peak project ended, he worked for the private mining company Northern GeoWorks based in Casper, Wyoming. In 2018, the company fired Krall, citing psychological instability and paranoid behavior regarding geological structures. Internal reports described him frequently drawing imaginary underground systems and claiming the Earth can be restructured if measured correctly. After dismissal, Krall withdrew savings, sold most assets, and disappeared from official residences. The last tax record trace showed he purchased a small wooden cabin in the northern forest near Sheridan, Wyoming, about 120 miles from Castle Peak. On October 5, a joint FBI-DCI team approached the address. The cabin was isolated, access blocked by old wooden fencing, without grid electricity and powered only by a small generator. From outside, it was locked with no signs of occupancy. When SWAT entered, they found a cluttered workspace inside, metal tables, old seismographs, Black Hills forest maps covering walls, and dozens of handwritten note rolls. On the main table was a large ink-drawn map detailing Castle Peak tunnels, with repeated notations Field 19B. Also present were 3 external hard drives, a laser measurement kit, and a camcorder similar to the one found beside Grace Miller's body. The forensic team sealed all evidence, collecting fingerprints from the desk, door handles, and map backs. Subsequent analysis showed fingerprints at the cabin matched 100% with the unidentified male DNA from the Castle Peak shaft, confirming Raymond Krall had been physically present at the scene where Grace Miller's body was discovered. While the FBI extracted data from the hard drives, DCI expanded review of Krall's medical and psychiatric records, finding treatment at a private Sheridan clinic in September 2019, diagnosed as delusional disorder with obsession over Earth structural mapping. The treating doctor described Krall speaking extensively about world deviation and geological layers needing human recalibration. After that visit, he did not return or provide contact information. Financial analysis showed Krall emptied his bank accounts in October 2019, with no further transactions. Tracing materials and equipment in the cabin, the FBI found most purchased online or from old mining surplus in Casper and Cheyenne, while the rest was stolen from Northern GeoWorks storage during 2017-2018, when Krall was still employed. This established he had been preparing to reuse the Castle Peak shaft for years before Evans' group disappeared. In the cabin was also a personal notebook containing the handwritten line, "Deviation must be calibrated. Samples GNE incomplete. Require recalibration in closed environment." This was interpreted as referring to the victims' initials, Grace, Noah, and Evan. Beside the notebook was a roll of plastic tape labeled 19B footages, but with the tape inside removed. Photos from the cabin showed layout matching recovered video images from the Castle Peak camcorder, including metal table, blue lighting, and measurement equipment racks. Carbon isotope analysis on a fabric scrap in the cabin matched the blanket material from the shaft, further solidifying direct links between Kroll and the detention site. Based on the combined evidence, on October 10, 2023, the FBI issued a federal arrest warrant for Raymond Kroll on charges of kidnapping, unlawful detention, and murder related to the Castle Peak area. The warrant was widely publicized nationwide, describing the subject as 6'0", graying hair, thin build, often carrying measurement devices or maps. FBI offices in Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, and North Dakota were directed to coordinate the search. In an internal report, Special Agent Mark Coulter concluded physical evidence, fingerprints, and cabin notes in Sheridan confirm Raymond Kroll was present at Castle Peak and directly linked to Grace Miller's death and the prolonged disappearance of the other two victims. The subject possesses high technical expertise, terrain knowledge, and survival skills. Assessed as extremely dangerous with obsessive tendencies toward controlling enclosed environments, the warrant was prioritized as Level 1, marking the transition from scene investigation to federal manhunt for the man who called himself the Surveyor. In January 2024, nearly 3 months after the arrest warrant for Raymond Kroll was issued, a civilian expedition group of 3 people hiking in the western edge of Bighorn National Forest, Wyoming, discovered a small wooden cabin hidden among old pine trees. The cabin was not on any official maps, its door barricaded with dry logs, but beneath the floorboards there was a strange vent emitting warm air. When they knocked on it, the hollow echo revealed a void underneath. After prying up a few planks, the group discovered a narrow steel door leading down to a basement. The air rising from below carried a strong smell of dampness and metal. They shone flashlights down and saw a man slumped against the wall, emaciated, clothes tattered, eyes closed. At first, they thought it was a corpse, but as they approached, the man stirred slightly and whispered, "Water." The group immediately called 911, alerting the nearest ranger service. When the rescue team arrived, the man was pulled to the surface in a state of exhaustion. With low blood pressure, pale skin, and clouded eyes, papers found in an old jacket pocket listed the name Noah Lang. On-site biometric identification confirmed he was one of the 3 people who went missing in Spearfish Canyon in 2020. Noah was airlifted to Sheridan Memorial Hospital, where he spent 3 days in intensive care. Medical reports showed severe malnutrition, near total vision loss, due to prolonged lack of light, muscle atrophy, and severe damage to visual reflexes. When he regained consciousness, he was terrified, unable to believe he had been rescued, repeatedly asking, "Where is he?" It took 2 days of reassurance before psychologists could begin questioning him. Noah said he had been held in the basement for nearly 3 years, with no sense of time passing. He described his captor as self-identifying as the Surveyor, always hidden behind a mask, speaking in an even, emotionless voice. The captor forced Noah to listen to recordings called Lectures on the Perfect Map, which talked about the Earth being a flawed structure that needed correction. He made Noah learn to redraw diagrams of the basement, soil layers, and stratigraphic deviations. Noah described the basement as divided into multiple compartments, each with locked iron doors and dim blue light. He was forced to measure distances, take notes, and whenever there was an error, the room lights would go out, leaving only a speaker repeating phrases about accuracy and correction. Throughout his captivity, he was fed only a mixture of powder and murky water, sleeping on a cold metal floor. Noah said that in the early months he heard Grace Miller's weak voice from the next room, then later screams and metal banging, after which there was nothing. Evan, he recalled, had been taken elsewhere before Grace died. Noah said that in early 2023, the Surveyor appeared less often, with only a voice through the speaker. One night, the captor opened the basement door and told Noah it's time to remeasure another layer, but no one returned. From then on, he was left in darkness, surviving on dripping water and old stored food. He had no sense of time, only knowing that when the food ran out completely, he had nearly accepted death. He remembered the first light after 3 years being from the expedition group's flashlights. When the FBI was notified of the discovery, Special Agent Mark Coulter and Detective Susan Halberg immediately flew to Sheridan for a preliminary interview. Noah was too weak to sit for long, but when shown images of the Castle Peak basement, he immediately recognized the structure, stairwell position, and steel doors. Despite blurred vision, he remembered the overall layout and used trembling hands to sketch it on paper, a drawing that matched almost exactly the forensic team's prior measurements of the Castle Peak site. He accurately pointed out the locations of the holding cells, ventilation pipe direction, and where he believed Grace had been kept. When the FBI cross-referenced, details about slopes, distances, and tunnel sections matched the forensic survey data completely. This testimony confirmed the accuracy of Evan Reed's prior account. Additionally, Noah described the captor as slightly taller than him, broad-shouldered, with a hoarse voice and a habit of tapping 3 times on the wall before speaking. Details matching sounds recorded in video from the Castle Peak camera. Both witnesses confirmed the captor used the name the Surveyor to refer to himself, and both recalled the dim blue light from old industrial lamps, the same type found in the Sheridan cabin. Noah's DNA matched cell samples taken from a blanket in the second basement at Castle Peak, proving he had been held there. Subsequent investigation determined the cabin where Noah was found had a similar underground structure to Castle Peak, smaller but using the same materials, welding style and lighting equipment. On the walls were faint red paint markings. S-19B, identical to symbols in old military project files. In the initial conclusion report, Coulter wrote, "Witness Noah Lang survived over 3 years of captivity." His testimony matches completely with Evan Reed's account and the Castle Peak crime scene, validating the pattern of forced confinement and organized criminal nature. Noah's emergence not only corroborated Evan's story, but provided living proof that the perpetrator had operated multiple holding facilities, capable of moving between Wyoming and South Dakota over 3 years while maintaining underground basements built to the same technical design. In early March 2024, while extracting testimony from Noah Lang continued, the FBI's signal forensics team in Denver detected an unusual low-frequency radio signal sequence emanating from the eastern mountains of Bighorn, less than 20 miles from the cabin where Noah was found. The signal repeated every 12 minutes, weak but steady in amplitude, using an analog code similar to sensors from the Surveyor 19B project. Based on signal strength, the monitoring team pinpointed the source within a narrow valley near the Tongue River edge, an area of rocky crevices with no residents. On March 4th, a SWAT team and federal investigators were deployed. After 3 hours navigating steep terrain and thin ice, they reached the signal area. In the forest, under thick snow, they found a man-height round steel hatch, camouflaged with pine branches and moss netting. Magnetic detectors confirmed an artificial metal chamber below. At 5:42 a.m., SWAT began cutting through the steel lid. When opened, cold air and machine oil smell rushed up, along with faint light from deep below. 2 SWAT members wearing body cameras descended first. Under flashlight beams, they saw a small steel tunnel leading to the main chamber, where a man sat motionless in front of monitors and old radio equipment. He turned slowly, hands raised without resistance. "Raymond Krall," Agent Coulter called out, "You are under arrest." The man showed no reaction, only nodded and said softly, "You found me." He was handcuffed and brought to the surface in silence. Searching the basement revealed it was a secret operational base Krall had maintained for years. Authorities seized 146 VHS tapes, neatly stored in black plastic cases, each labeled SX-POR, sublayer. Also recovered were 3 large hard drives, topographic maps of the Black Hills and Bighorn areas, and numerous technical drawings of underground basements marked Field 19B. On the desk, police found a thick leather-bound notebook titled Surveyor Logs, containing hundreds of handwritten pages detailing stratigraphic balance experiments, sample deviations, and human body corrections. The handwriting nearly matched that in the Field Study 19B notebook seized at Castle Peak. In the basement was an old camera on a tripod, aimed at the central area, where an iron chair and restraint straps had once been placed. Some old electronic devices were still running, with slowly blinking LEDs making regular clicking sounds. The forensics team shut down all power, sealed the radio system and recording equipment. In a small rear storage area, they found additional boxes of medical supplies, welding tools, and a dust-covered chemical protective suit. On-site forensics confirmed Crowell's fingerprints on all evidence items. The entire basement was documented and mapped before being sealed. As he was led outside, Crowell offered no resistance, only requesting to take the leather notebook. The request was denied. He looked around at the snow-covered mountains and said, "You're too late." At 9 a.m., Crowell was flown by helicopter to the Federal Detention Center in Casper, Wyoming, then transferred to Federal Holding in Rapid City. The FBI report sent to Washington that day described the subject as calm but emotionally detached, answering minimally in a disjointed voice. During preliminary questioning about the 3 missing persons from Spearfish Canyon, he only said, "They helped me see what lies beneath the ground." He refused further statements and requested to write, saying writing is more accurate than speech. Examination of the Surveyor logs revealed multiple entries describing experiments labeled Subject G, Subject N, Subject E, matching the initials of Grace, Noah, and Evan. One near-final page read, Subject G, terminated. Subject N, pending recalibration. Subject E, released. Objective complete. The VHS tapes were sent to the Technical Analysis Lab in Quantico. Preliminary viewing of some tapes showed footage of basements similar to Castle Peak, with dim blue light, and videos of restrained individuals in confined spaces, forced to measure and read numbers aloud. Other tapes captured Crowell in the control room discussing deviations and earth balance levels. Based on the volume of physical evidence, the FBI officially confirmed Raymond Crowell as the operator of the entire chain of underground basements linked to the Spearfish Canyon case and illegal detentions. On March 6, 2024, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Department of Justice announced the federal arrest warrant had been executed. Raymond Crowell was charged with 3 counts of federal kidnapping, 2 counts of first-degree murder, and 1 count of intentional unlawful imprisonment. In the Operation Summary Report, Agent Mark Coulter wrote the final line, "Target Raymond Crowell, the Surveyor, captured alive at Bighorn Underground Facility. Pursuit phase concluded, prosecution phase initiated." Decoding and analyzing all evidence recovered from the Bighorn basement took over 6 weeks, becoming the critical phase in establishing the criminal nature of the Raymond Crowell case. At the FBI lab in Quantico, the 146 VHS tapes were cleaned, digitized, and categorized by time codes on the SX and sublayer labels. Results showed more than half the tapes contained footage of the 3 victims, Grace Miller, Evan Reed, and Noah Lang, in narrow compartments, hands chained, working in metal spaces. The earliest segments, dated August 17, 2020, showed Crowell in frame, wearing a mask and technical jacket, directing in an even low voice, "Measure the vertical axis, record the number. Deviation exceeds threshold, recalibrate." Grace appeared in multiple segments, slumped against the wall with bruises around her wrists, sometimes pulled to her feet, and forced to hold measuring devices. In one segment over 3 minutes long, she attempted to run toward the narrow door. The image shook violently, then showed Crowell repeatedly striking with a metal rod, after which the screen went black. The footage ended with heavy breathing, and Crowell's voice, sample G, failed. Forensic audio analysis confirmed the voice matched Raymond Crowell's from interrogation recordings. Other videos showed Evan and Noah working separately, reading numbers aloud while Crowell adjusted control panels. Some segments displayed Trial 19B, Layer 2, in the corner, matching technical codes from Surveyor 19B. The image analysis team used spatial recognition software to identify basement locations in the videos, cross-referencing with Castle Peak and Bighorn structures, finding complete matches, double-hinged iron doors, industrial blue lighting systems, steel plates reinforced with identical materials. This proved Kroll had repurposed old military project infrastructure for criminal activity. DNA testing from the basement floor, chains and metal rod found in the Bighorn cabin all matched Grace Miller's samples from Castle Peak, confirming she had been assaulted with those weapons. Analysis of blood traces on the geological measuring rod in Kroll's toolbox showed cracks and dried tissue consistent with skull injuries in Grace's autopsy report. The forensic report submitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office concluded cause of death for Grace Miller was severe cranial trauma from multiple impacts with a blunt object. Weapon identified, Surveyor tool Model 98 geological rod from Project 19B equipment batch. Electronic data from the external hard drives contained numerous note files where Kroll wrote about the perfect structural model and using human bodies as living reference points. One entry dated April 12, 2022 read, "Structure must be measured through fear. Only when humans are at the edge of endurance is the data honest." This phrasing was viewed by psychologists as evidence of severe delusional disorder. A psychiatric evaluation panel, formed by the FBI and Federal Justice Institute after Kroll's arrest, conducted 10 consecutive days of assessment. The official report diagnosed him with mapping delusion disorder, an extremely rare obsessive spatial control disorder in which the patient believes any geological or structural deviation affects world order and must be corrected at all costs. Kroll's medical records from a Sheridan clinic in 2019 supported this, noting he often spoke of the Earth needing rebalancing through humans. In interrogations, Kroll did not deny the video content, only saying, "They agreed to help me measure. I showed them accuracy." He appeared indifferent to images of victims being beaten, calling it part of the correction process. FBI behavioral experts assessed Kroll as showing no signs of deception but blind conviction that his actions were science, not crime. In the Surveyor logs, he meticulously recorded measurements, described using human bodies to determine deviation centers, referred to each victim as a sample, and viewed himself as maintainer of stratigraphic balance. Attached maps showed he had drilled, measured, and expanded basements multiple times, moving equipment between Wyoming and South Dakota to create a perfect underground map. Technical teams estimated he had worked continuously there for at least 4 years, building and maintaining basement compartments with handmade materials, installing lighting, cameras, and ventilation by hand. All activity was conducted secretly, with no identified accomplices. In the comprehensive report to the Department of Justice, Agent Mark Coulter stated clearly, "Physical, video, DNA, and personal document evidence confirm Raymond Kroll kidnapped, detained, and tortured victims to serve personal delusions about creating a perfect underground map." Motive was not material gain, but stemmed from obsessive psychological disorder. The final extracted video images, dated September 6, 2023, one day before Evan was found in Deadwood, showed Kroll opening the basement door, looking into the camera, and saying, "Experiment concluded. Deviation has been balanced." This is regarded as his final statement before abandoning the basement, closing a 3-year chain of abuse that left evidence, making the Spearfish Canyon case one of the most bizarre criminal files in federal investigation history. In July 2024, nearly 4 months after Raymond Kroll's arrest, the federal trial titled United States v. Raymond Kroll officially opened at Sioux Falls Federal Court, South Dakota. The court's largest courtroom was arranged with special security, attended by representatives from the Department of Justice, FBI, DCI, and nearly 100 reporters from major national news outlets. Kroll faced 6 serious charges, including 3 counts of federal kidnapping, 2 counts of first-degree murder, and 1 count of conspiracy to unlawfully imprison. He wore a gray prison jumpsuit, handcuffed, gaunt figure, long hair touching his shoulders, face expressionless as he was led in. When the judge asked him to confirm identity, he said briefly, "Raymond Kroll, geological engineer." The federal prosecution was led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Tessa Helga, who had handled the 2021 Colorado Caves case, supported by a forensic team, including Agent Mark Coulter. The defense was represented by 2 public defenders, arguing Crowell suffered severe mental disorder, preventing awareness of the criminal nature of his actions. The over 70-page indictment detailed the entire crime process, from repurposing the Castle Peak basement, abducting the 3 victims, to detaining and killing Grace Miller. Prosecutors played excerpts from the 146 VHS tapes showing Crowell ordering victims to perform measurements, along with audio of assaultive behavior. Grace Miller's DNA was confirmed on the geological rod found at the Bighorn basement, while Crowell's DNA appeared at all crime scenes. The Surveyor logs notebook was entered as evidence, with entries specifically referencing the 3 victims by codes GI. In court, prosecutors emphasized this was not impulsive action, but a deliberate plan, meticulously prepared over years, to serve personal delusions about creating an underground map. On the 3rd day of trial, Evan Reed was called as a witness. He walked to the stand, face still gaunt, voice trembling but clear. He recounted being abducted, held in the metal basement, witnessing Grace die while trying to escape, and hearing Crowell call himself the Surveyor. When prosecutors played video excerpts of him measuring in the basement, Evan bowed his head, unable to watch. Noah Lang, the second witness, appeared in a wheelchair with only partial remaining vision. He described the lectures on the perfect map Crowell forced him to listen to for months, and the feeling of being completely deprived of any sense of time. When defense counsel asked if he believed Crowell was aware of his actions, Noah replied, he knew exactly what he was doing. He called it work. Testimony from the 2 surviving victims made the courtroom atmosphere heavy. When allowed to respond, defense presented reports from court-appointed psychiatric experts, concluding Crowell suffered mapping delusion disorder, an obsessive spatial control disorder, causing him to believe humans were part of geological structures needing adjustment. They argued he could not clearly distinguish between research and crime, and should receive treatment rather than punishment. However, prosecutors countered with journal entries showing Crowell understood consequences, such as Subject G, terminated, and Subject E, released. Objective complete. Helge emphasized, this was not research, it was systematic murder. He knew they were dying and continued. The forensic investigation report was presented on the 7th day, proving Crowell actively built detention facilities, equipped cameras, measuring devices, artificial lighting, and maintained operations for years. Additionally, prosecutors presented electronic evidence of Crowell sending anonymous emails in 2019 to a military technical forum asking how to reactivate underground Surveyor 19B sensor systems. This was regarded as proof he was fully aware of his actions and goals. The final arguments between prosecution and defense lasted over 5 hours. Crowell's attorney insisted the client was driven by pathological delusion, while prosecutors responded that delusion does not explain technical preparation, equipment fabrication, and systematic detention maintenance. Throughout the trial, Crowell showed almost no emotion, only taking notes in a small notebook. Occasionally, he looked at the screen showing video segments and gave a faint smile. The trial lasted 12 days, drawing major national media attention. Evening news broadcasts called it the Surveyor trial, describing it as an intersection of crime, science, and delusion. Legal experts debated the boundary between mental illness and criminal responsibility. Outside the court, citizens gathered with signs demanding justice for Grace, and no map is worth a life. In the final closing statements, the judge instructed the jury to weigh awareness capacity against intent. As the trial concluded, physical evidence, DNA, videos, and technical journals were all deemed authentic, while the incapacity argument was questioned due to Crowell's preparation, concealment, and calculation. The final session of the 12th day ended in complete silence when the judge announced the jury would begin deliberations the next morning, officially entering the verdict phase in the most bizarre criminal case South Dakota had ever seen. On the morning of July 19, 2024, the 12-member jury began entering the deliberation room after nearly 2 weeks of continuous trial. The discussion lasted a full 9 hours, during which the members reviewed the video footage capturing Grace Miller for the last time, examined the forensic report, the entries in the Surveyor logs, and the testimony of the two surviving witnesses. The debate centered on a single question: whether Raymond Krell was sufficiently competent to understand his actions. At 6:27 p.m. that same day, the jury foreperson stepped out and handed the verdict form to the presiding judge. The courtroom fell completely silent as the verdict was read. The jury unanimously finds the defendant Raymond Krell guilty on all 6 counts charged, including 3 counts of federal kidnapping, 2 counts of first-degree murder, and 1 count of conspiracy to unlawfully imprison. Krell remained seated upright, eyes fixed on the small notebook on the table in front of him, showing no emotion. When the judge asked him to stand for sentencing, he slowly complied. Federal Judge Richard Salinas read the final sentence. Considering the brutal, premeditated, and prolonged nature of the criminal conduct, along with the irreparable consequences for the victims, the court sentences the defendant Raymond Krell to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, to be served at the federal detention facility in Florence, Colorado. As Prosecutor Helg and Agent Coulter bowed their heads to acknowledge the sentence, sobbing broke out from the rows behind, where Grace Miller's parents embraced each other, while Evan Reed sat motionless, hands clenched tightly on his knees. Krell was handcuffed, and 2 federal marshals escorted him out of the room. He walked slowly without turning back. As he reached the door, he said softly, loud enough for the court's recording system to capture, "You only see the surface of the map." The brief statement left the room silent for a few seconds before the steel door slammed shut. A press conference followed immediately at the Sioux Falls courthouse. Prosecutor Helge confirmed that the Black Hills abduction case was officially closed, ending a nearly 5-year federal investigation that began with the disappearance of 3 friends in Spearfish Canyon and concluded with the perpetrator's conviction. Agent Mark Coulter spoke briefly. "We have brought light back to places that once held only darkness." Sheriff Tom Heller, who had led the initial search operation in 2020, sent a message to the victims' families: "Finally, we have found the answers." After the trial ended, the Department of Justice returned to the families the personal items recovered during the investigation: Grace's silver necklace, Evan's old notebook, and Noah's pocket compass. The handover ceremony was held privately in Rapid City, attended only by close relatives, investigators, and the 2 surviving witnesses. On a small table in the center of the room were 3 wooden boxes engraved with names, placed side by side. Grace's mother said through tears that she never thought she would hear the word closure, but at least now her daughter had justice. Evan stood silently, saying nothing, while Noah sat beside him, his trembling hand touching the compass, his gaze distant. The FBI's final report sent to Washington confirmed that the entire Black Hills abduction file would be permanently archived in the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Special Records Vault, marking the case as closed, conviction secured. On July 21st, Raymond Krell was transported by federal security flight to Florence Supermax Prison, home to the most dangerous offenders in the United States. The last image of him for the press was a gaunt figure in an orange prison jumpsuit, wrists shackled, head slightly bowed, the late afternoon sunlight reflecting off the thick glass, and ending to the long journey of a case that the investigators themselves called the final frontier between science and crime. In September 2024, nearly 2 months after Raymond Krell's conviction, the FBI officially released a comprehensive investigation file exceeding 600 pages related to the Black Hills abduction case and the forgotten military engineering program known as Surveyor 19B. The report, compiled jointly by the FBI's Sioux Falls Field Office and the Department of Justice, synthesized all technical, forensic, psychological, and historical findings of the project. The declassified documents revealed that Surveyor 19B had been initiated by the Department of Defense in 1994 to develop an underground sensor network for measuring seismic vibrations and geological structures in the Black Hills region. The program operated for 4 years before being suspended in 1998 due to a subsurface collapse that injured 2 engineers and led to the entire test facility being sealed. The report also confirmed that Raymond Crowell, then the on-site engineering supervisor, was one of the few individuals with access to the detailed technical blueprints of the tunnel system. Years after the project ended, Crowell continued sending letters to the Department of Defense requesting restructuring and restoration of the seismic measurement system to complete the unfinished data. Pentagon Technical Office records show that in April 2018, Crowell submitted a proposal titled Surveyor Recalibration Initiative describing plans to restore the Castle Peak tunnel section, reinstall sensor equipment, and conduct human behavioral testing to determine natural deviation thresholds. The proposal was rejected after just 10 days with the comment, "lacks sufficient scientific basis and poses serious safety risks." Following the rejection, Crowell cut off contact, withdrew from the engineering community, and only a year later, according to Northern GeoWorks records, was fired due to unstable psychological behavior. Appendices in the FBI file also revealed that several subsidiary tunnels of Surveyor 19B had been constructed across an area extending from Spearfish Canyon to northern Wyoming. But only 2 were located in sealed Castle Peak and Bighorn. The remaining 3 locations, designated Sector C, Layer 5, and Test Cell 8, were not clearly identified on geological maps. Because the area lies deep within federal forest land, surveying the terrain to locate the rest of the project would take many years and require federal approval. In its conclusion, the report recommended maintaining restricted federal zone status for Castle Peak, absolutely prohibiting all civilian activity within a 10-mile radius and installing permanent monitoring stations to prevent unauthorized entry. When asked about the true origin and scope of Surveyor 19B, the Pentagon declined to comment, issuing only a brief statement. This project is no longer within the Department of Defense's operational scope, and all related information has been transferred to the Department of the Interior. Meanwhile, the Congressional Committee on Homeland Security Oversight called for a review of military technical document storage procedures to prevent similar incidents. FBI investigators concluded that Crowell had exploited administrative gaps and the obscurity of the abandoned project to access and take control of part of the underground facility, then converted it into a detention space serving his personal delusions. The report also acknowledged the possibility that undiscovered subsidiary tunnels remain, as Crowell's Surveyor logs contained multiple references to Tunnel 3B and the unfinished lower level. Nevertheless, authorities stated there was no evidence of additional victims beyond the 3 identified in the Spearfish Canyon incident. On September 22, Castle Peak was permanently sealed by the federal government. New steel fencing was erected. Tunnel entrances were welded shut with concrete and covered with protective earth and rock, and a large warning sign was placed at the former access point reading, "Federal Restricted Zone, no entry by law." The final report ended with a note from Agent Mark Coulter. "The case is closed, but its legacy is a reminder of the fragile boundary between knowledge and obsession, between science and crime." The story of the Black Hills abduction is not merely a thrilling criminal case. It is also a profound warning for modern American society, where the line between knowledge, ambition, and obsession sometimes blurs in the shadows of isolation. Raymond Crowell, an engineer who once worked on the military project Surveyor 19B, allowed his passion for science to turn into a delusional pursuit of the perfect underground map. He was not the embodiment of pure evil, but a distorted product of a culture that encourages the pursuit of perfection while forgetting ethical limits. In today's United States, where technology, research, and individual freedom have advanced dramatically, this story reminds us that knowledge must always be accompanied by responsibility. Crowell's actions show that when knowledge is detached from human values, it can become a tool of destruction, not only for others, but for the person who possesses it. Evan Reed and Noah Lang, the 2 survivors, represent the resilience and recovery capacity of the American spirit. They carry their pain, but choose silence, finding freedom again in nature without seeking fame. Their journey reflects a profound personal value, that healing does not come from constantly revisiting the past, but from learning to let it rest. And Grace Miller's memorial plaque in Spearfish Canyon, inscribed with the words, "The light will never go out in the forest," serves as a reminder to every American citizen that in this turbulent society, justice and humanity endure only when we dare to look into the dark places and choose to keep that light from ever going out. Thank you for joining us on the full journey through the Black Hills abduction case, where darkness, obsession, and human resilience intersect amid the silent mountains of America. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more true crime and mystery stories, where every uncovered truth reminds us that justice always exists, no matter how deeply it is buried.